Good evening. I'd like to call our Town of Sidney regular council meeting on Monday, April 5th to order at 6 p.m. Hello to members of the public attending in the chamber this evening, and to those who may be watching the live web stream, or to those who may be watching a recording of the meeting at a later date. We have all members of council. Good evening to colleagues participating in the chamber this evening. We do have staff participating from the chamber, and some staff will be participating via Zoom. I'd like to acknowledge with respect that we are holding this evening's meeting in the territory of the Saanich nations, and we express our gratitude to the Saanich people for their stewardship of these lands and waters, and that this has been their home for millennia. Before looking for a motion to approve the agenda, there are two additions since the agenda was published last Thursday. The first council members would have received earlier today is the letter of correspondence from Sally Stropel with regards to item 6.A, and that will be considered under that item. And then we have a slightly revised set of minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting of last week under item 12C. The amendment or revision to that is that two additional items during that agenda review, two additional items were received and appended to the agenda at that time. That wasn't indicated in the published agenda last Thursday, but we now have it before us and will be part of the permanent record. And with that, I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move that the agenda be approved as amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Next, we'll go to public participation, and we'll begin with our public participation period. And we do have an opportunity for members of the public. We have no members of the public wishing to address council via Zoom this evening, but I will open the floor in just a moment to those in the gallery this evening. If they wish to address council, you will have 4 minutes to address council. We ask that you try to keep to that time. We ask that you provide your name and address, and there is a button to activate the microphone, which will show being live when it is read. And so first time I'll call. Are there anyone wishing to address council this evening? Please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Andrew Loen. It's nice to see you all again. Together with my wife, Lori, we own the commercial lot at 9700 3rd Street. This is the small orphan lot across from St. Andrew's Church. I would like to address our existing development permit and variance application. During the review process last Tuesday, there was a couple of mistakes made during the presentation, and it became clear that there was an error in the development permit application, which I'd like to address. The design of our building is not a live-work space. This was a misunderstanding that came up several times at last week's council meeting. Our design is a fully separate commercial space covering the ground level. As per code, it has full fire separation, including automated fire doors, between the commercial and residential floors. The commercial space has its own washroom and a fully separate entrance off of 3rd Street. The commercial space also has the opportunity to be rented out and even strata titled and sold separately. Secondly, at last week's council meeting, the size of the residence was brought up numerous times, with 4,000 square feet in size being of concern. This, quite frankly, surprised the heck out of me. We were aiming for a living space of around 2,500 square feet, and I was wondering where the number came from. I am opposed to excessively large homes, given climate concerns and resources. When we came up with the design of the building, the size and floor areas were based on our existing offices and our modest home in Esquimalt. After last week's meeting, I reviewed our design and confirmed that the area of the residence is in error on both the development permit application and the following report to Committee of the Whole that came along. If we were to list the residence for sale when it's complete with the existing design, it would be listed at 2,400 square feet. So there's a mistake in the numbers that were put down. The lot at 9700 3rd Street is referred to as an orphan lot. This small footprint of the lot makes it very difficult to design a building that fits the zoning and the requirements of Sidney. It would be almost impossible to fit a multi-family development onto the lot without getting a lot of further release on the restrictions to parking. Council has raised objections to any parking variance, which we appreciate given the lack of parking downtown. Based on one of the councillor's suggestions at the last meeting, we have talked to our neighbors, St. Andrew's Church, and they are pleased to provide a parking spot for our business for use anytime except Sundays. I would also like to point out that Lori and I have one vehicle between the two of us. This means that the commercial spot on our parking lot will sit empty the vast majority of the time. Our building design and layout has been generating interest and inquiries from people in the public who would like to know if the building will be for sale once it's finished. There appears to be a lot of interest in this type and size of building design for the downtown Sidney area. We are the owners of a high-tech engineering company, Loen Engineering Incorporated. It's been around for 15 years, centered in Esquimalt. I am a professional engineer and run the company, and it includes a team of engineers, designers, and technicians who all work remotely. Loen Engineering specializes in radio frequency electronics and designs and manufactures equipment that is sold globally. Our network of distributors cover every continent and support and sell our equipment. We are currently based in Esquimalt and looking forward to moving our full operations to Sidney. This will include setting up a production facility in the industrial area of Sidney. Our building at 9700 3rd Street will be the head office for Loen Engineering. However, I will be the only person working at that location. All of our client meetings occur globally, with myself doing a lot of air travel to the US and overseas.
Yeah, but it's
This is one of the reasons that we are keen to move closer to the airport. In addition to the engineering office, the commercial level includes a bespoke art gallery and studio. This gallery will be open by appointment only, and it also serves as the boardroom for Loen Engineering. In summary, our proposed building for this unusual orphan lot includes a fully separate commercial ground floor with a 2,400 square foot residence above. This is not a live workspace, nor is it a 4,000 square foot residence. With our occupancy of the building, we will be adding parking to the neighborhood, not reducing it. The size, scale, and use of the building fits perfectly with Sidney's overall plan and the local neighborhood. We can't wait to move our home and our business here. These delays are costing us money. We request that our development permit and variance be forwarded to the APC for review. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Loen. We appreciate you coming before council this evening, clarifying information or providing additional information. I'm going to, given that there has been some clarification of information and possibly new information from last week, turn briefly to council if any council members have a question for Mr. Loen. This is not to engage in a dialogue on points and that sort of thing, but if you have a question based on information that was provided or any other question, I provide that opportunity now. Councillor Fallot.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Loen, for coming back and for filling in some the misinformation and some extra information. You mentioned parking at St. Andrews. How is that going to work? How do people know that that's where they're going to park or where they can park? And are you getting specific spots, or how is that going to work?
Yes,
or
we are
how do you
getting.
anticipate that working?
There's a small part of the parking lot of St. Andrew's Church that's right across the street from our parking lot. There's, I think, 5 spots there, and they are going to be giving up one of those spots, and we will put our name on it. And pretty much anybody who comes to the engineering office will be using the commercial space, and if they're in the engineering offices, then we won't be having anybody in the gallery, so the one commercial spot will suffice. If there are a couple of people coming, we would tell them before they were coming about the spot across the street. And the same for people who make appointments to come into the gallery. They would be addressed to that spot if the one in the lot was taken.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. I just have one question, and that is, as part of the variance application, or both applications indicated that you were going to pay in lieu for one parking space and then requesting the variance. Given the opportunity that you have to possibly pursue a parking space in the location you've described, are you considering 2 parking spaces and taking a second parking space to not go forward with the pay in lieu?
No, we're not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions from council, again, thank you, Mr. Loen, for coming before council this evening.
Thank you.
I'll ask for a second time if there is anyone wishing to, good evening, Mr. Barker. Sorry?
Thank you. My name is Jack Barker. I live at 9706A 3rd Street, Sydney. Lived there for the 12 years and I built it about 12 years ago. Before that I lived on 2nd Street, which is a similar development on 2nd Street. I've noticed these lots, as I say, the 30 foot by 120, and we call them orphan lots. They weren't zoned C1 some time ago, they were zoned residential, and they changed to C1. They're an extremely difficult lot to build on. And one of the things I'd like to say is the proponent came to sit down with my wife and I, go through the plans, and we had an option to look at it. You should look at the plans very, very carefully. And I know it's difficult for councillors to look at everything, what's coming across you and what people are saying to you. But I'd like you to look at the plans very carefully, because they've come forward to us, they've listened to us, they've tried to leave view corridors on our backside and adjacent properties. They've adjusted the roof lines to 3-storey and 4-storey. If you look at the plans, look at the roof lines. The roof lines from the bed and breakfast to the next one look really good. It's a modern building. We're an old-fashioned building. The bed and breakfast is an old-fashioned. There's a modern building next to it. We've had nothing but trouble with the development next door, and I've been wanting to come to council and talk about that for a number of times, but resisted it. But they've been there 4 years. We've been 4 years under dust and cover, safety consequences. I've addressed the safety consequences with the proponent, and they told me what they're proposed to do, and I'm quite satisfied that it will be safety for the builder, for our side of the property. I can tell you that it's not been safe on the other side of the property, where the bed and breakfast, and they've had insurance claims and things dropping on the cars. They've had 2x4s nearly at one of the tenants next door. Now, I'd like to discuss what everybody's on about, bachelor units. Everybody says we want bachelor units for young people. I appreciate that. You've got to realise there's a bigger, broad fight, and we need housing for older people as well. We need family housing, and I call that family housing. You say it's big. My home is 2,400 square feet. The one next door is 2,400 square feet. The one next door has a family and with 2 young children. All my grandkids have lived with me over a period of time. I was glad to get rid of them, but I helped them through university and other things, all of them. And my grandson actually volunteered for the fire department, and he resided with me because he had to in the fire department. So, part of the community, and from a parking point of view, we don't really have a problem parking, and everybody brings it forward. If you look at the parking, we have that problem on 3rd Street with 24-hour parking. But other than that, I have no real problem with parking in front of mine once we get the property back. From a parking point of view, you've given variance to a number of units. And this one, I think, is taking into consideration the design, the neighbourhood. It's asking for a major variance. And I think it should be supported. Now, let's talk about parking. You've got a Modo parking spot on 3rd Street. That used to be 2 parking spaces. You've got a 4-unit work-live, which is not really a work-live. It's a live place. Our work-live have not been working throughout the Victoria area. If you can tell me where they've worked, they may have worked occasionally, but generally they've turned over to living space. And so, from this point of view, I think it's a good development, taking into consideration view corridors and sunshine. Nobody else did that, and the one next door has ignored us completely for 4 years. I would hope you'd change your mind and think about it very, very carefully, and go and have a look at it. I know one councillor goes every time there's a development permit application on this or a change. He walks the property, he never spoke to me. I'm not going to say who it is, but I know he pays close attention to it. I would hope he'd listen carefully and say and change his position if he was against it, because I really think he's taken the time to look at it, he's seen it over the years, and he knows the problems we've had. I'd like to thank you for letting me speak to you. I hope you'd support this development. I think it's well worth it. I think the other thing I'd like to say, I walked here tonight, and I have trouble walking sometimes, but I walked here tonight. Look at all the development in Sydney that's taken place. Not one is a Sydney developer. Nearly all are outside developers. We should be helping the people who live in Sydney and helping our residents. And these are the residents of Sydney who've owned the property for 2 or 3 years. We deserve to help them. We deserve to work together. It's going to bring a workforce to Sydney that's good workforce, good company. There's a lot of pluses for this. And for the minor variation, I hope you consider it. And I would like to meet with you if you want a one-on-one outside of council, if need be. I never talked to councillors and tried to sway them. That's the first time I've ever said that. But I know that you'll give it careful consideration. Okay, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Barker, for coming forward tonight.
And if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them.
Thank you. I'll call for a third time if there are any other persons wishing to come forward to address council this evening. Seeing none, we'll close public participation and we'll move on to other items on the agenda. The next items are under Section 5 bylaws. And the first is bylaw number 2226, our financial plan for the 5-year period 2022 to 2026. And we have considered this at a previous meetings, and we have a recommendation. Sorry, we can proceed with 3 readings this evening.
I'll move first reading of financial plan bylaw number 2226, 2022.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed? None opposed. Motion carries.
I'll move second reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. A question through you to staff. Looking on page 4 of the report, just wondering, in the forecasting of the surplus deficit, 2022 lists just over 2 million, and in 2026 it's listing just over 800,000. That's quite a drop, so I'm wondering, is there any concerns that staff has regarding future surplus volumes?
Thank you, Councillor. No concerns. Year 1 typically is a bit distorted compared to the others because we have a full year of known capital projects in there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries.
I'll move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries, and that will come forward to a future meeting for adoption. I'll next turn to item 5B, which is bylaw number 2227. Tax rates for 2022 have been discussed at a previous meeting, and we can move forward with 3 readings this evening.
I'll move that bylaw number 2227, the tax rates for 2022, be given first reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? We have 2 opposed, Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Fallett. The motion does carry.
I move second reading.
Second.
Discussion. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe first, then Councillor O'Toole.
We talked about this before, but just wanted to clarify my position and why I'm voting against this motion, mainly because of the tax policy review and the adjustment that we're planning to do. Not that I'm not in favor of equalizing things with between residential and business. I just think this particular method, I think, will end up putting a lot more burden on the residential taxpayer than we anticipate. And so that's why I won't be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor O'Toole?
Thank you, Mayor. And like my colleague, I'm also concerned about the shift between commercial to residential. Having said that, this is the 2022 tax rates bylaw, and that particular revision with respect to addressing that change will come into the 2023 budget cycle. So I'm content to support the bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Fallett.
Thank you. I too had spoken about this when it came up, and it is the split. I feel that the way we're working right now with the commercial tax rate is a fair way of doing it. Don't agree with it, and so although I don't have an issue with the rest of it, I will vote against it because of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. Seeing no other speakers, I'll speak briefly that I'm in support of this. Through the presentations and discussions through council, we're aware that our current tax policy is working well, but that my perspective is that this is an improvement over the longer period. And in terms of the shift in tax burden from commercial to residential, I think our amendment to the original staff recommendation and doing this over a period of 10 years will be a very modest impact on residents. I'll leave my comments there. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the questions. All in favor? Opposed? Two opposed, Councillor Keefe and Councillor Fallon. The motion does carry. And we'll now turn to section.
That was only second reading.
I'm sorry? That was second reading. We'll go for third reading.
Move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Two opposed, Councillor Keefe, Councillor Fallon. The motion does carry, and that will come forward for adoption at a future meeting. I will now turn to section 6 under development permit and development variance permits, and under 6A we have development variance permit application number DV 100309 and development permit application number DP 100824 at 9617 7th Street to increase the maximum building heights in order to construct 2 single-family small lot dwellings. We had no submissions as of publication of the agenda, but as appended to the agenda or added to the agenda this evening, we did have one item of correspondence from a resident, and I will now turn to council for a motion and discussion.
I'll move the recommendation that DV 100309 be approved and DP 100824 be approved, subject to the conditions as per council resolution number 2022.12.237.
Second.
Discussion, Councillor Fallon?
I think it's a good project. I looked at the letter from the one writer, and they're concerned about the height. I don't know if they've taken into consideration that there is flood level increase on that one, and I don't know if that's what they're referring to, but I don't have an issue with this project. I think it is good for Sidney, and I'm happy to approve it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? I would just like to acknowledge and briefly speak to a second point in the letter of correspondence we received, and it was with regards to approval of variance application appears to be more frequent for contractors in new developments than for existing property owners who wish to make changes to their homes and property. I can say through our council term we have received variance requests from existing property owners, and the same avenues for coming forward to council are available to new development applications and developments on existing properties. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries unanimous. I'll turn to section 7 and look for motion regarding our minutes of the regular council meeting of Monday, April 11th.
I'll move the minutes be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? And none opposed. The motion carries. I have nothing under Mayor's report this evening. I'll turn to council reports. I'll first turn to Councillor Garnett, who is our liaison to the Sidney Museum Archives. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Latest board meeting was April 9th, and for the first time in a very long time, we were actually able to hold a meeting at the museum, which was nice in the newly renovated space. Financially, the museum remains in a solid financial position as of March 31st, 2022. Impressively, donations for the period from January 1st to March 31st were 42% over budget and 160% over the same period last year. So that is really good news. Furthermore, the total operating revenue for the period January 1st to March 31st, 2022 was 35% over budget. So from a financial perspective, they're still on very sound footing, which is a great thing to hear. The suitcase project is now up and running on display at the museum, the traveling exhibit. I had a chance to go see it, and it's well worth the visit. It's quite educational. It was very interesting to listen to 4th and 5th generation descendants of internment camps. They were given the same sort of protocols that actual internment people that were in internment camps were given, but with of course the caveat that they aren't actually going, so it's a little different. But it was very interesting to hear their perspective on what they would take and how it impacted their family having their relatives go through this process. What was really surprising in listening to a lot of the interviews was that a lot of them were not taught this in school, and I was quite shocked because I remember being taught this in school. But I think, if anything, it just shows how important exhibits like this are. If that's being misplaced or taken out of a curriculum somewhere, at least there's still an avenue for people to be informed about what's happened in our past. Because history, whether good or bad, all needs to be spoken. And to teach it to our children is incredibly important, so we can prevent things from like this happening in the future. So I recommend people go see it. I'm hoping the schools will take the children through. I think it's well worthwhile to go and see the exhibit. I'm going to end my report with an update on museum staffing. As council might remember, I provide information that both the Education and Outreach Coordinator and Assistant Director and Archivist had tendered their resignations. They're both finished as of now. I'm happy to report that the Education and Outreach Coordinator position has been filled by Miss Jessie Johnston, who will be starting on May 1st. Miss Johnston is just completing her MA in Public History at UVic and has been a volunteer with the museum. The position is going to be 3 days a week, so it's not going to be the same. And by sort of showing a little bit of flexibility in this, they were allowed to provide a greater offer and salary for the new position of Assistant Director and Archivist. And that closing date is May 1st. So hopefully they'll have somebody in place fairly soon. It's going to be very important. Leading to my last and finally my last point update is that effective May 14th, Executive Director Miss Alyssa Gerwing will be resigning from her role to pursue other career opportunities. I just want the community to know that these resignations, although challenging given the closeness with which they occurred, are actually a good reflection of the Sidney Museum. Positions like these are often stepping stones for greater career opportunities. In this case, the museum is a victim of its own success. As Alyssa used to often say, the museum is punching above its weight class. For its size, it is an incredibly well-run institution in Canada, and we're very blessed to have them and the people we've had running it. It's been incredibly successful in growing and expanding its offerings, and others have taken note. And because others have taken note, they see the people running it, and so of course they come looking, hey, we'll provide you this. And sometimes it messes up what these people need in their future, so that it happens. And I wish to take the time to personally thank Alyssa for her amazing effort and contribution to that growth and the many positive changes she has instituted. Her leadership and grant writing abilities were critical for the success of the museum during the pandemic. I truly believe she was the right person at the right time in this role for the Sidney Museum. And I wish her great success in her future career endeavors. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garlett. We appreciate the report, and we also appreciate you acknowledging the good work of the museum that's recognized beyond our region, and also the contribution from the key people in the museum organization. We'll next turn to Councillor O'Keefe, our liaison to the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, for an update. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the Chamber had their AGM on March 30th, and in your package you have a copy of their presentation that the Executive Director gave, and he authorized me to share that with Council and the public. Just a couple things that I'll highlight from that. They have 319 members currently. They lost 22 over the last year. About half of their members are from Sidney. They commented that the Chamber has gone through what they call the reflecting phase this past year. As you know, Denny Warner moved on from that executive position, and the new Executive Director, Al Smith, took that position. And so they were busy sort of finding their way, what direction they wanted to go, supporting their their members through the pandemic and looking to refocus where they want to invest their time and energy. Their goal in the coming years will be, in their words, that the Chamber is and should remain the largest, most respected authority on business for the Saanich Peninsula. And they'll be doing this by aligning their goals or their energies in 4 key areas in terms of advocacy, accountability, awareness, and community. Some of the more tangible things that they'll be doing in the near future, new branding for their website, new membership. They're going to do a membership drive. They have membership tiers, so there's no longer just one standard chamber membership. There's different levels depending on the degree of involvement. And they're talking a lot about gathering more and better data to make more informed decisions. Another interesting thing that they mentioned just in passing was that in talking with their members, it's estimated that Saanich Peninsula businesses expect to hire 3,000 to 3,500 new employees in the near future. And so they wanted to highlight that, especially in terms of the need for housing that already exists. So they wanted us to make sure we took note of that. It's still an issue for workforce housing, and that need will increase with the anticipated growth that they see coming in the business community in the coming year. So I'll leave it at that unless anybody has questions.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. We appreciate the update. If we could have a motion to receive Councillor O'Keefe's report.
Move receipt of both reports.
Second.
Any discussion or questions of Councillor O'Keefe? Seeing none, thank you for moving both receipts. All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. We'll turn to committee reports, and I'll first turn to Councillor Wainwright, our liaison to the OCP Review Advisory Committee in our meeting of April 6th, 2022.
I'll move that the minutes be received.
Second.
Any discussion?
The meeting was entirely dealing with the comments from the APC on the draft OCP.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to next item 12B to Councillor Rintoul, our liaison to the Economic Advisory Committee in their meeting of April 13th.
I'll defer to Councillor Wainwright, the current liaison.
I'm sorry,
Yep. I'll move that the minutes be received.
Second.
Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I went through the minutes, and I actually watched the video as well. And I note that in the minutes that the committee did make a motion about, in regard to the economic development strategy, the first report. And they talked about, they also had some concern that the situation assessment was based on old data and does not incorporate key new information mentioned in the April 13th meeting. And what I get, and that was a concern that I also had with the report as well. So I'll support the motion to receive for information, but I will have a follow-up motion in terms of, I think I'd like to see some further action in regards to that.
Okay, I'll take that as a motion arising, but we do have
Okay.
a motion on the floor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to, first turn to Mr. Humble, maybe responding to that in part, and then to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just following up on Councillor O'Keefe's comments, I just wanted to indicate to Council that the information from the EAC, the minutes, as well as what transpired, was passed along to the consultant, along with the previous comments that were made by Councillor O'Keefe. So they're in receipt of that information. I did have a discussion today with the principal of Lionsgate Consulting, the consultant on the Economic Development Strategy project. And a couple of things I just wanted to indicate. in advance of, I guess, a potential motion and discussion is Mr. Nickel made it very, very clear that the document is a draft. It's still in a draft stage. It hasn't been finalized. That indeed he would review the video of the EAC meeting, and he fully intends or expects that the final draft will meet the expectations of the town, as well as the EAC. He further indicated that some of the updates around information, such as business license data, etc., isn't easily accessible. The 2017 report that was done by the work of the previous EAC, the fine work that was done, it's very challenging to update that and duplicate that without going to some expense around purchasing that business license data from Stats Canada. And it also requires some interpretation of the NAICS codes, etc., which involves several days' work. So there's the cost of purchasing plus the cost of the additional work around that. So one has to look at what the potential value might be coming out of that. And he also commented on the updated census information. We have the current 2016 census. The labor force census information for 2021, that won't be available until November, December at the earliest. So again, you know, that's something that could be looked at, but it certainly can't be updated easily. So just wanted to provide that for council's information.
We appreciate that additional information, Mr. Humble. I'll now turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I also watched the meeting, and I just wanted to provide a comment that I really enjoyed. It was excellent discussion amongst all members, and very informative for a lowly guy like me who's not an economic genius. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. So we do have the motion on the floor to receive, and I'll proceed if, is there any further discussion on that? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries, and I will turn back to Councillor O'Keefe if you have consideration of a notice of a motion arising.
Thank you. I'll put forward the motion, just so we can have a discussion about it, and in light of Mr. Humble's comments, we may decide not to move forward, but I'll put it forward anyways for discussion. And so the motion would be that staff advise Lionsgate Consulting that prior to submitting their final report, they revise the current situation assessment to better depict our current state by putting more focus on the information provided in Appendix A, provide a current picture of Sydney's business community based on current business license data or other available info, and incorporate the most recent census data that's coming out next week. So I'll put that out there for it.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second for discussion.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Yes, so the reason I provided a bit of specificity is when I was watching the EAC meeting, I think it was staff had made a recommendation about it might be useful for us to articulate what it was that we wanted to see differently. So that's why I got sort of quite specific there. In terms of, I recognize in terms of the census data, I wasn't too concerned about the demographic information. I don't think that's going to change a whole lot. And the new stuff is coming out, I think, next week, so that could, I think, easily be incorporated anyways. What I was more interested and concerned about was getting a current picture of Sydney's business community now in terms of, and maybe that's something they can get from staff in terms of a list of businesses that we have now, what our attrition rate has been, you know, how many new businesses have come on, how many businesses have we lost. I understand the SBIA, the Business Development Manager, which council funded had started putting such a list together, so maybe that's something that they could be provided with as well. And I think it's important because while I recognize that, you know, what they're looking at is trends, I think it's important to realize that since that data in 2017, 2 years of that has involved the pandemic. And I can't say, and I don't know if many of us can say, how have we really done in the last couple years? So when we get to planning our strategy, I presume that part of that strategy would involve a business retention and expansion campaign. So it would be, I think, really important for us to know what does our business community look like now, not back in 2017. There's a few other things in the report, just as an example, that I think needed to be cleaned up in terms of currency.
Okay,
So-
Councillor O'Keefe,
Okay,
if I might just interject for a
Okay.
moment, you are providing a lot of detail. And
Okay.
I think in terms of putting forward the motion and speaking to the motion, I think you've certainly advocated for the reasons you're desiring, you
Okay.
know, additional information, but I'm not sure each of the pieces of information beyond what you've
okay,
provided is
okay,
helpful,
I'll leave it at that
if you're
then.
comfortable with that.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it was an interesting discussion at the EAC, and after that lengthy discussion, the committee felt that the document was reasonable to for moving forward to the next steps. And the next steps involve 2 workshops, Wednesday and Thursday this week. And that's supposed to be a background document going into those workshops. And those workshops also include people from the EAC. So one of the big concerns that came up at the committee meeting was, obviously, you know, current census data is not available, and there are some trends, current trends that members were aware of and felt were important that aren't reflected in the data in that summary. However, those members are going to be going to the workshops to ensure that they bring forward those concerns about current trends, and they've also already, the committee's made the point that the consultants need to consider these trends and review the conversation that happened at the EAC meeting, and all of that's happened. So I guess the thing I'm a bit concerned about is the time-sensitive nature on this background document was to have it ready for Wednesday and Thursday. Even if this motion carries, the document's not going to get adjusted in time for those workshops. So then the question is, do we want them to back up and redo the background document, or just move on to do the final report the way the project is planned? Because if we move them off the current project plan and the way it was budgeted, usually that involves some cost and delay. And maybe we're okay with that. But since the meetings are already scheduled Wednesday and Thursday, you know, venues are booked, people are prepared to go, we might as well let that happen. And then perhaps next week, after we see what happened at the workshops, if we feel the need to provide direction, we could. But I don't think we should really be providing the direction now in advance of those workshops happening.
Okay, I'm going to go to first-time speakers.
Okay.
Councillor O'Keefe?
I was going to clarify, but it's
Okay, if it's a point of clarification, please go ahead.
Yeah, in terms of clarifying my intent, so the motion wasn't, I wasn't proposing that this report would be done prior to those workshops. So what I had said is that they would amend, update the report prior to their final report. So I was anticipating that they would still carry on with the workshops as planned, but when they come back to us with our final report, that they would have incorporated the information that had come from the EAC meeting and the workshops, so that we would have an updated current assessment. So I wasn't proposing to put off the workshops that were taking place.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Turn to other speakers. Councillor Fellett.
Thank you. So, given the explanation that Councillor O'Keefe has just given, and Councillor Wainwright saying that the workshops are happening this week, would it not be perhaps better to just leave this motion until after that and then see whether the motion is necessary or adjust the motion then? So I guess my question is to Councillor O'Keefe on that.
You can certainly address it, and I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe if she wishes to respond.
If council is feeling that they think this is going to get covered off, I'm encouraged by Mr. Humble's comments as well, in terms of there seems to be willingness on the part of the consultant to do this. As I said earlier, one of my reasons was for providing this amount of detail is that I had that impression that that was something that was required. But I'd be happy to rescind the motion and wait for the workshops to go through. And if staff feels that the consultant has a good handle on this, and they have the detail that council is expecting, I'd be happy to withdraw that.
Okay, so I'm taking that you are withdrawing, or you want a further comment from your colleagues?
Well, if there's not further comment from, I don't want to cut anybody
I'll
off.
provide some brief further comment.
Sure.
And I would be supportive of the motion being rescinded. I think while you provided a certain level of detail, there is all sorts of detail involved in this process. I think Mr. Humble has provided a good description of what next steps, that the messages have resonated with the consultant, and I think that this can be covered off going forward without this motion this evening.
I'll withdraw the motion.
And the seconder concurs? Thank you. And so we will move to, we have received the minutes. That was a motion arising. So we'll turn to item 13C, or sorry, 12C, and I'll turn to Councillor Fallett, who is chair of Committee of the Whole meeting on April 19th.
Thank you. Move receipt of the minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries.
There were two recommendations that came out of the meeting. Recommendation 1 is Development Variance Permit Application Number DV 100316 at 9376 Lochside Drive to reduce rear setback for 2 lots in a proposed 4-lot subdivision. Committee recommends, and I so move, that the owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 9376 Lochside Drive be notified regarding Development Variance Application Number DV 100316 to vary the required minimum rear setback for proposed lots 1 and 4, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval for the variance.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed. Motion carries.
Second recommendation is Development Permit Application Number DP 100830 and Development Variance Permit Application Number DV 100317 at 9775 First Street to vary maximum exterior side setback and maximum number of stories in order to construct a bicycle storage room. Committee recommends, and I so move, 1, that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 9775 First Street be notified regarding Development Variance Permit Application Number DV 100317 to reduce minimum number of stories and increase maximum permitted exterior side yard setback for a building addition, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval for the variance. And 2, that development permit application number DP 100830 to permit the construction of an addition onto the existing building for the property at 9775 First Street be brought before council for consideration of approval if council authorizes the issuance of the development variance permit.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And the motion carries. Councillor Fallett, we do have a third staff recommendation arising
Yes.
from the council meeting, committee of the whole meeting last week. I would like to move the recommendation that council considered last week. And if there's a seconder, I'll explain the reason for it. And that I think if we go through that process, it certainly does not remove the opportunity to consider this motion based on a reconsideration of the motion from last week. So I will so move that development permit application number DP 100824 to permit the construction of a 4-story mixed-use building, and development variance permit application number DV 100314 to relax the off-street parking bylaw requirements for the property at 9700 3rd Street be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for review and comment.
I'll second for discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright.
Could I discuss?
Well, as the mover, if I could speak,
There's a technical issue.
please go for it. And I'm actually maybe speaking to the technical issue.
Yeah.
And actually, if I could speak to,
Go ahead.
so it was a committee of the whole meeting, and the resolution was made and defeated. And that does not carry forward automatically to the next council meeting. We have seen the other recommendations that were approved by committee of the whole come forward to council for ratification. When I use the term reconsideration of the motion that that committee of the whole, it is not exercising the procedural reconsideration motions or availability that is available to mayor or to council. I've consulted with staff, and given that it is not a final motion in the sense that it was approved, or given that it was considered at committee of the whole, it does not require a special procedure of reconsideration to come forward to council this evening. I will turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. Earlier today, during the public participation, we heard there was a significant error in the DP application, and there was also some new information about availability of a parking space on adjacent property. Technically, we need to have the DP application amended and have that new information in writing before we refer it to APC. So I would suggest that we should not make a motion to refer it to APC. We should make a motion recommending that the applicant submit revised development permit application and supporting documentation. And I'd be happy to make that motion later.
Okay. Sorry, I will let first-time speakers, as I've spoken already, go proceed. Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, so I'm just considering what Councillor Wainwright has said, and the staff recommendation, which I would presume that Councillor Fallett would move as the chair of committee of the whole, was that council did not support the DP and DVP application as presented, and that the applicant consider submitting revised plans. So the staff recommendation that is recommended out of committee of the whole seems to be the appropriate thing to do. That's, if what Councillor Wainwright is saying is that we should be, and I would feel more comfortable with, you know, we've heard that there's errors made and that sort of thing, but I think we need to see the revised information, that needs to go to staff and then come back to us. So that recommendation seems to be what we should be just following through on. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to respond to that comment, and then I do have speakers, Mr. Humble, Councillor Fallot, and Councillor Duncan. And that is that one of the points made by council members at Committee of the Whole meeting was, I think the phrase was used is time is money for proponents and development. If we refer this, if we pass the other motion and have the applicant resubmit plans and then it come to a further meeting, it's going to postpone it. And what I'm suggesting by making this motion this evening is that we could actually amend this motion. I wanted to read it in as it was last week, is that that the applicant submit their revised plans and that it be forwarded to APC. I think it's fairly clear to council from the comments or from the proponent speaking during public participation what the changes to the applications will be, and I would like to move it. We've already had 1 week go by. I would prefer to see it, but I appreciate those perspectives. I'll turn to Mr. Humble, then to Councillor Fallot, and then to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just following up on Councillor O'Keefe's comments. So one thing that's important to note that the staff recommendation is not the result of a recommendation coming out of Committee of the Whole. In fact, there was no recommendation coming out of Committee of the Whole. The staff recommendation was made in absence of a resolution from Committee of the Whole coming forward to Council. So essentially, we just pulled something out because we thought that it was inappropriate to not have some sort of recommendation coming forward to Council. So I just wanted to make that point, that this is, and quite frankly, the staff recommendation is something that it's a way forward for Council, but it's not necessarily something that staff ultimately support, in the sense that we made it very clear that we do support the DP and the DVP application. So also wanted to make that point. And if I may, Sandy, could you just read back the motion, the most recent motion that was made from the mayor?
I'm reading it I read it from the minutes of.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically that the development permit and the development variance permit be referred to the APC.
Okay. So again, one option for council is if they do want to expedite this in moving forward, is it could be subject to the submission of revised drawings or an indication of the approach that was proposed by the applicant, i.e. Securing parking on a property within 30 meters of the subject site. So that's an option as well for council.
Okay, so just to be clear, there could be an amendment with a simple subject to submission of revised plans. Okay, I'll turn to Councillor Fallot, then to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. So before I go any further, I'm just looking the minutes from last week. In the motion that was defeated, show it DP 100824, and in our agenda it's talking about DP 100832.
I'll turn to staff if they could provide a clarification, please.
I would think it's a typo, but maybe if staff could check their file number on that, just to confirm. Allison?
Ms. Verhaeg? Good evening, Ms. Verhagen.
Good evening. Would you please repeat the question where you thought the typo was occurring?
There seems to be a different development permit application number in the minutes of last week and in the recommendation on the agenda this evening.
Okay. I'll just pull up the agenda for the staff report.
I see that the typo may have been in the defeated resolution there. And at A above, it has the 832, and in the current recommendation, it's 832. Just to confirm, Allison, the development permit application number for 9700 3rd Street.
It's DP 100832.
3-2, yeah.
832. That you.
Okay, so if we could consider the motion corrected with the, with that development.
Thank you.
Thank you for raising that.
Okay, and thank you to Councillor Garnett who actually just pointed that out to me. I was actually going to go back to last week's motion that we defeated, seeing that we had a staff recommendation. So at the time that that motion was made and was then defeated, I had asked staff, do we need to do anything further at this point? And staff said, no, we didn't. We didn't need another motion. There was no need for that. And Councillor Wainwright, I believe, explained that to leave it open, to not deny the application, the development application, but to leave it open. And out of that, so that the proponent could come back with revised plans. I'm paraphrasing the conversation. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I would just like to, yeah, I'm not sure if it is exactly correct. I believe I indicated that council could come forward with a secondary
Yes.
motion regarding it, that it would be good to have some clarification around that, but I would have to check the tape.
Okay, so it was left anyhow that this could be a standalone if council decided to leave it open. And so staff's recommendation in this evening's agenda that council does not support the DP and the DVP application for 9700 3rd Street as presented, and that the applicant consider submitting revised plans. I see nothing wrong with that motion, and having heard the proponent this evening in public participation, bringing forward some new information indicating that there were errors in the original submission, that's important information, and I don't want to make a decision this evening to simply forward this to APC. This is a verbal indication from the proponent, and I applaud for the thinking outside the box of where to find parking. I think that's commendable. But I would like to see this come before us again and look at it. So I would have preferred to have gone and allowed me to make the recommendation and have that conversation. So I'm not going to support the recommendation that we currently have on the table, which is a repeat of last week.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. Turn to Councillor Duncan and Councillor Garnett.
Thank you. I'm supportive of the mayor's motion. I would have moved the same thing with
Subject to?
the subject to added to it, because I'd like to expedite the process. I don't feel that any of the changes that the proponent brought forward is something we'd actually would need to see in plans that would materially alter how we would send this to APC. I don't need to see plans of where their additional parking space would be, or the arrangements they're making with that neighbor that wouldn't have been required as part of the decision in the first place. The size of their house was also not something we needed to approve or not approve. It was within, as long as it's within the size and the height restrictions, how big they would have decided to build their private dwelling was really a matter of their own personal preference. And I do remember that 4,000 square foot, and I'm not even sure that that was faulty information, because I believe that was actually the lot size. And usually when council is forwarded an application, that's all we see on the schematic. We are usually not actually given something that says what the total square footage of a multi-story house is. We get the footprint, the square footage of the lot. And so I'm not sure, I believe that council misinterpreted into the record that was the house size when it was actually the lot size, and I don't believe that the proponent was actually presenting misleading information. Similarly with the commercial space, I don't believe they actually presented something that was faulty so much as the additional information that made that very clear was not in there, and then council discussed it as if that was true. So again, I'm not sure, I mean, they might be able to submit an application where they made that very, very clear, but I don't believe that to say that they submitted to us faulty information that needs to be somehow retracted and then represented is necessary. So I'm quite content to have that's simply clarified in the plans in a way that it goes to the APC to correct that record.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Mr. Humble, and then to Councillor Garnett, then to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So appreciating that the proponent raised the clarification on the gross floor area of the residential component, and there's been some discussion about that and critical information or information that would be useful in terms of making a decision. I just wanted to make it clear that has no bearing whatsoever with respect to the actual development permit. In fact, the size of the dwelling unit, the size of the commercial area, the number of stories, the height, that all complies with the zoning bylaw. The only thing that council should be concerned about with respect to the development permit is form and character under the development permit guidelines of the commercial designation. And that's typically reviewed by the Advisory Planning Commission in a detailed staff report that's brought forward at the time of the APC. So I just wanted to provide that clarification for council.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll now turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Just for clarification, it actually did state in the staff report the total square footage of the house, and that was not their fault because the architect had provided plans that showed the square footage for each floor, actually in the back of the proposed proposal. And regardless of that, it's not here or there, but the fact of the matter is that this, for all intents and purposes, the proposal was flawed, and it's not even completely accurate on what we're now looking at. Something from my perspective is completely different. And if you want to follow process, then you really should go through the process of doing it properly and looking at it and then bringing it forward. And I'm sorry if it takes longer, and then time is money. Somebody else said, I didn't say that, but it's basically, for all intents and purposes, in my perspective, a completely different application. Not necessarily, because even the parking aspect has changed. There's nothing the same. So I would like the time to be able to look over the whole thing again from that perspective. And I think as a council, we should be afforded that opportunity. So I won't support the motion on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright. Sorry, did Councillor O'Keefe speak the first time? Thank you. Councillor Wainwright?
I'll pass.
Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll take a moment just to commend the applicant because you clearly listened to the discussion in great detail, and you very quickly went and addressed the concern that relates directly to the variance itself that you're requesting. And I get that needs to be documented. I like the suggestion of the amendment to the motion that's before us around the subject to. But I think I expect that when we see that, that council's going to be comfortable with what's being suggested there. I certainly am. I think it's a creative solution that came as part of Councillor Wainwright's comments. And this council will get an opportunity to see this again. So if it goes to APC, we'll get APC's comments on this, comes back to council. We have that opportunity. But I think in fairness to the applicant, by moving this forward to APC at this stage and having the amended applications go to APC, it gives, I think, the applicant a fair process, and it gives both the APC and council opportunities to weigh in on this. So I'm supportive of the motion in the context of the amendment that was referenced. Thank you.
Thank you. We actually haven't amended the motion, so I will move that the motion on the floor be amended with subject to revised plans at the end of the motion as read in.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Yes. Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also think it's worth pointing out that if it is the intent of the applicant, if this proceeds, and they indicate on the plans that the intent is to provide the parking space on another lot within 30 meters of the building, that as per our parking and loading bylaw, that they would be deemed to meet their parking requirements and a development variance permit isn't required, that this is a straight development permit process without the DP. And that's clearly articulated in our off-street parking and loading bylaw.
So, thank you, Mr. Humble. So just to clarify, whichever motion we were passed this evening, if the proponent through the revised plans removed the variance, then only the DP would go to APC, and only the DP would come back to council. Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm not in favor of the motion for a few reasons. I guess, first of all, the rationale given up front seems to be, yeah, we could delay this to make sure we get the updated plans, but time is money. And so if that's the concerns I have is this, if the concern was time is money, I guess it doesn't sound like this was an issue on the town's part, so that's something that the client has to bear the burden. So if the plans weren't accurate, if their person who was presenting this gave inaccurate information, that's on them. It's not on us. So I guess that's the first thing. Second, if time was really important and they wanted to see this through, I would have anticipated that they would have spent the time and whatever they needed to do to bring those amended plans to us tonight. So if there really was a concern, get those things amended and have those for us review, rather than going through this. The other thing that concerns me is that this reminds me of other processes where we do a whole lot to change our normal process to allow for an individual who perhaps made a mistake. So I'm thinking of a recent variance request. And I guess what I'm concerned about is the message that we're sending the community is if you make an appeal to the mayor or a member of council that, can you speed this along for us because time is money, I'm concerned that we're circumventing our normal process to accommodate an individual again who's perhaps didn't put their best foot forward the first time. So I worry about that. Are we going to change our normal process in terms of how we deal with development applications to allow other participants in the future? Because there have been other developments come forward where council may have said, we want more info, or we send things back. So are we going to change our process in order to fast track things like this? So that's a concern for me, that we're circumventing our process for those reasons. So I won't support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, yeah, I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. One is that from a staff perspective, we wouldn't require amended plans regarding this. It would just be simply an indication in writing that they plan on pursuing the parking, meeting the parking obligations as per section 4.5 of the parking and loading bylaw, i.e. Securing a parking space within 30 meters of the subject site. We just require something in writing. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is, I think quite frankly, allowing it to proceed to APC from a staff perspective is not about fast tracking. It's actually, if they're going to do this anyways, it removes, as I said, the necessity for the development variance permit, and it's straight a development permit. So we talked about, the possibility of looking at, there's been a lot of discussion on housing and red tape, etc. So this is an opportunity to, it is following the process, is just making it a little bit more efficacious for the proponent in moving it forward, rather than coming back to council with a written statement that they plan on meeting their parking obligations under section 4.5 of the parking and loading bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I would like to speak to my original comments and the comments from council, some comments from council with regards to time is money. It was not myself who used the phrase time is money. I was making reference to another council using it in terms of it would be more proper to deny the application rather than waiting to go through a process of APC and back to council before denying the request. My emphasis is not is not on time is money. My emphasis on whether the information that is provided tonight is material enough such that the changes that have been discussed and how they would come forward to council is necessary for council to make a decision to refer it to APC. We're not making a decision on the application. We're making a decision on whether to refer it to APC. I'll look for next speakers. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm prepared to support the subject to and sending it to APC, and I do feel strongly, process-wise about seeing plans before they go off, but what we've heard from the proponents is that they're not looking at making major revisions to the plans. There's been a mistake that they're going to correct, but there's no suggestion that it's going to be a radical change to the plans. There'll be there won't be a need for a parking variance. I have enough confidence that if when staff sees those plans there's a major change, they will bring it back to council before going to APC. But if it's just correcting a mistake as is being suggested and the plans don't significantly change, I am comfortable with it going to APC and then coming back here, because we have seen the plans, and if there's a mistake in the math, that's not a big deal. The plans are still going to look the same.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further speakers, I'll call the question. Sorry, I'm turning to Ms. Verhagen. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out to council that if a revised plan is received along the lines of what the applicant indicated this evening, being their intent to pursue a parking space off-site, the only change I could anticipate seeing on the plans that were submitted was to the first page. Maybe an update to the data summary table that indicated the size of the residential unit and then indicated where the required parking spaces were provided. That would be the only change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. I will now call the question on the amendment to the motion, the subject to clause. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Garnett, Councillor Fallett, Councillor O'Keefe are opposed. The motion carries. We have the main motion on the floor as amended. Is there any further discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Garnett is opposed. Councillor Fallett is opposed. Councillor O'Keefe is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Council. I'll now turn to staff reports, and under item 13A, we have a staff report on the update on a BC Building Code spatial separation requirements and fire response time. I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen for an introduction, please.
Good evening. Thank you. This is being brought back to council for your information about the process of staff review of building permits. At the time when this was first brought to council in June 2020, it was determined that the fire response time to incidents was beyond the threshold permitted by the building code. So building officials had to interpret the code requirement for the amount of openings on the side of buildings to reduce those openings, to reduce the risk of fire spread between buildings. Since that time, and due to a budget change earlier this year, the fire response time has reduced, so it is got faster. So there's not the same concern. So building officials are now interpreting the code differently as they had been previous to June 2020. I know that's not a very straightforward explanation, but it's not a very straightforward issue. So please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. I'll turn to Council if there are any questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. Very happy to see this come forward, and I know Chamber of Commerce and people in the development industry will be happy about this. The question that I have is, will this apply to all developments now, no matter where they are in the process, or just to ones that come in from this point forward?
It would apply to building permit applications being considered right now. If somebody who was constructing something with an active building permit that was already approved, if they wanted to make changes to follow in on this revised interpretation of the code, they would have to contact town building officials and ask about how to do that in terms of revising their approved plans.
Okay, that's great. So that is still an option for them.
They
Okay.
would have to contact the building
Yeah.
officials, yeah.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Councillor O'Keefe. Any further questions? So we do have a motion.
I'll move the recommendation that this report be received for information.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Mr. Hagan. And now we'll turn to item 13B. We have a report on community emergency preparedness, grant application, EOC, and training. And I'll turn to Fire Chief Mickelson if you'd like to introduce, please. Good evening, Chief Mickelson.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The report before you is another opportunity for the town to have upwards of $21,000 towards EOC grant training, and primarily that would be allocated for use in the first quarter of 2023 if we were successful in our grant application.
Thank you. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Thank you for the report, Chief. Just one question. On the first page, you're just talking about the grant application request funding to, and it talks about including local stakeholders. So I'm just curious as to, are we looking at involving more community groups? Just looking for some clarification on that.
Through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, it would all depend on exactly what evolutions or types of exercises we chose to do. It would very likely involve our extended, our nursing home groups and other ones we have existing relationships with in the community for emergency preparedness. So we would lever those relationships with those existing groups, be inclusive of the other fire departments, our PMO partners, as well as search and rescue and those other kind of adjunct participating agencies that we typically work with. So those would be the ones that we would try to incorporate into our EOC exercise.
Sure.
Please go ahead.
So during the pandemic, the Chamber of Commerce and the SBIA were quite involved with the EOC. So would you anticipate them also being part of that local stakeholder group?
And again, through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, it would depend on the type of exercise. If it was very EOC driven and specific, yes, we were one of the first municipalities and one of the few that actually embedded a representative from the local chamber in our EOC, and that was, been recognized as a best practice and as something we're very proud of. It would depend, depending on what evolution we chose to undertake. If it was very operational in the field, probably would not involve the local chamber, but if it was more of a recovery oriented type of operation, well then yes, we would definitely try to include them in the EOC, and we're just not at that. We'd have to get the grant first, and then we'd determine how best we would how we'd use those monies and to what extent we would build out an exercise.
Sure. Okay, good. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief Mickelson. It seems to me, while reading your grant application request funding too, and Councillor O'Keefe sort of touched on the training and who would be involved in it. If I'm not mistaken, it seems to be almost coming from the report we got and how they said you could how you could use training of other people to help during what happened in the pandemic when the EOC was actually brought into fruition. Is that kind of the thinking behind all of this?
Very, very much so. Yeah. Again, through the chair to Councillor Garnett, it's very much so. I mean, there unquestionably there's fatigue with staff and I think in the community in general, but this presents an opportunity for us to you know, kind of make a more, there's no doubt that we need a more robust and create some depth in our organization to have an EOC that can be stood up for long and extended periods of time. And I think this would provide an opportunity for us to kind of bolster our roster to say, and you know, including many members of the community. So if we did have to have another extended EOC, we'd be in a better position than we were previously.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. If there's no further questions, we do have a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that council support a $21,500 grant application for the town of Sidney for the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, EOC, and training stream.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries unanimous. We'll turn to item 13C, which is a staff report on events and noise regulation bylaw. I'll turn to Ms. Clary for an introduction, please. Good evening, good evening, Mr. Demare.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Yeah, I'll do an introduction with this. Good evening, Council. So this report brings forward a couple items, main items regarding special events and our noise regulation bylaw. Since the sort of the relaxation we've seen with the pandemic restrictions, the town has seen quite an influx of applications come forward for use of various parks, majority of it being at Beacon Park in the Pavilion. Number of those applications are proposing to use amplification, which under our noise regulation bylaw requires council to waive a portion of the noise regulation bylaw. So this report speaks to those main two items. We have 7 applications that have recently come forward that would require the waiving of the bylaw for a special event. Those are in the report, as well as seeing sort of the volume that we've experienced recently and the time it takes to process and creating reports. We're looking for support by council to maybe bring forward some amendments to our bylaw, noise regulation bylaw, and to our policy that speaks to the use of parks and facilities to allow for the sort of smaller scale events, staff approvals on those. And within the report, there's a number of recommendations. Thank you. Be happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll turn to colleagues. I'll turn to Councillor Fallett.
I was ready to make the recommendation. I don't know if there's a question coming.
Yeah, I have a question. Do you have a question, Councillor?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Demare. My question is about you. In the report, it mentions you're seeking council's expectations in regards to the events, those smaller events, and the need for portable toilets, and perhaps relaxing that requirement. So my questions are around that. Do we have an idea of when the washroom that's planned for the waterfront, do we anticipate to see that this year or this season?
Through the Mayor. No, it's still under design at this point. We'd be looking at construction hopefully later this year into next year. So we'll not be ready for the facility. That facility will not be ready for any events for the summer, unfortunately.
Okay. So there will definitely be some need for, I guess, toilets, even for those smaller events. I guess I'm a little bit concerned about if we waive the requirement for that, the pressure that will put on surrounding businesses. And I'm wondering if we have considered, or if you have any idea of what costs would be for if the town were to absorb the cost for providing portable toilets, say just for the summer season during those other events.
Sorry, Councillor, just to clarify your question, you're asking for the estimated cost of doing so?
Yeah, or if that's something that we've considered, or...
Well, sorry, I mean, in terms of a process.
Okay.
I mean, if there was a cost associated with it, it would come to council for approval, or would have to come to council for approval.
Yeah.
Sort of thing, but...
So I guess I'm trying to get an idea of, is is it a large amount or a small amount? If it's a large amount, then I might just say, okay, maybe we'll just relax. We won't ask for those portable facilities to be provided by the smaller.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think whatever the amount is, and I'll certainly turn to Mr. Demare, is it that amount is gonna be considered a lot to some and perhaps not to others. But
Yeah.
Mr. Demare?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have done some inquiries into some costs. We haven't received a lot of feedback as yet, as I think some of the event organizers with the construction industry right now, getting portable toilets can be a bit of a challenge. With the construction industry, they've got a big handle on them. So at this point, we did reach out. We hadn't got any feedback on actual costs for rental. Purchasing a unit, if we took that route, for example, we did get some costs on that. Accessible portable toilet, probably in the range of about $3,000 just for the purchase of the unit. That wouldn't include the maintenance and operating of it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a motion or a recommendation?
I'll move the recommendation one.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. There are two recommendations, and just given the nature, as one is waiving for specific events, and then the second one is authorizing staff. So if we could separate the
Okay.
motions. Thank you.
I'll move the first recommendation that council, under authority of section 2D of the Sound Regulation Bylaw 1689, waive the prohibition of sound amplification and sound for the following special events. 1, or A, School District Number 63 Music Concert, Beacon Park, May 19, 2022. B, Influence Board Shop Community Skateboard Event, Tallista Park, May 21st, 2022. C, Cascadia Seaweed Corp Yoga, Beacon Park, June 4th, 2022. D, Caught in the Act Music Concert, Beacon Park, June 11, 2022. E, Piano Music by Sharon, Beacon Park, June 12, 2022. F, Will and Wheel and Hair Lounge Pride Picnic, Beacon Park, June 18, 2022. G, Artsy Community Arts Council Lantern Festival, Beacon Park, August 20, 2022.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And none opposed. Motion carries unanimous. Thank you.
The second recommendation, that staff be authorized to bring forward amendments to Noise Regulation Bylaw number 1689 and Policy WS-020, use of public parks and facilities for the purpose to delegate authority for the director engineering to waive sections of the noise bylaw for minor special events and grant the use of parks for special events that include amplification.
Second for discussion.
Moved and seconded for discussion. Any discussion? Councillor Fallot, is the move?
No, I'm good.
Okay, seconder?
Yeah, I won't support the recommendation. I believe this is something that should remain in council's approval process. Not to delineate from the conversation too much, but I just feel like it's something I would like to weigh in on as a representative of the community. And I think that's something that a decision, whether it's small or minor, however you define it, how you define minor or small, I think it's something that the community would prefer that we have a stake in having to say in. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I do have a question through to staff, and that is, within this motion, it does say to waive sections of the noise bylaw for minor special events and grant the use of parks. There is minor events in terms of what the size of the event might be, but if it's amplified, is there a distinction between minor and major? And we're more concerned, we're passing the authority on with regards to the amplification, not whether it's a minor or major event.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. We have a number of events that they use the pavilion, and they may just want an amplification of their speech or what they're speaking. That's sort of a lower level to a point where there's instruments and amplification of music. So we sort of view it as if it's sort of the size of the event as well, how significant an event may be. If it's something that staff wouldn't feel comfortable approving, we'd certainly bring those sorts of events through to council.
Okay, so I appreciate that clarification. That is, the minor is actually not referring to the event size, it's referring to the types of amplification. So for example, if there was a Summer Sounds concert with a group that had, you know, a couple of stacks of amplifiers, not that they're trying to broadcast down a Cordes, but is that something that staff would consider a distinction between minor and major, and then bring the major forward to council?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the idea is, yeah, to allow staff to do those minor events. That would be small scale, where they'd have amplification, something like the Summer Sounds series event, something that larger scale where you're drawing, you know, hundreds of people down. Those would certainly come through council.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The recommendation of the motion before us is just about bringing forward amendments for further consideration of the noise regulation bylaw, and we may end up kind of cherry picking some of those suggestions that would help streamline, and we may have some concerns with what's brought forward, but I'm happy to support this, to see these brought forward for council's consideration. Thank you.
And thanks for highlighting that, Councillor, that this would the amendments would be coming back for consideration. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? One opposed. Councillor Garnett. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next item is 13D, staff report on the Ironman 70.3 Triathlon on Sunday, May 29th. I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll introduce this report as well. So this report brings forward information on the Ironman Canada's event that's being held on the Peninsula, scheduled for Sunday, May 29th. The component that runs through Sydney is a cycle portion of the event. It enters Sydney from the south through Lochside, 5th Street, up to Malibu, through to Resthaven Drive and out McDonald Park Road. It's early in the morning. We've had this is their 25th running of the event, their 25th anniversary. It's been very successful in the past. The town hasn't had any issues in the past as well. So there's a recommendation brought forward for the approval of that event.
Thank you for the introduction. I'll turn to questions. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. DeMayor. So just out of curiosity, I asked the CAO earlier for the map of the race, and so I'm looking back under discussion where it says that the cyclists will go 30 to 45 kilometers an hour. So there are sections of 5th Street that are 30 kilometers an hour. So are we saying that we're just waiving the speed limits, and have we had discussions with the RCMP about this? Because they're essentially a vehicle and they're going over the speed limit. So that's my main concern when I look at this.
Through the Mayor to Councillor Garnett, interesting point. This does go through to the RCMP as well. They have to approve their traffic management plan. In the past, we've never had a comment received back or on that as being a concern.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. DeMayor. I just have a question about the notification to affected residents and businesses, and just some clarification. Would the town be broadcasting that widely? So, for example, I don't live along the route, neither do my neighbors, but it would probably be good for them to know that if they're wanting to go out in the morning, that certain parts of Resthaven or other parts of the town might be closed to the bike race, so they could make alternate arrangements. So is that something we would normally do to notify the community?
The town, through the Mayor, the town actually often will support and advertise these events through our social media and broadcast that out through those channels. In the past, the event organizers done a really good job on advertisement. They typically do advertisement in local papers, As well as should point out, this isn't actually a road closure. The road is still open to traffic. It's just that there is traffic control at sort of the main points of intersection where the cyclists are running through to control the traffic flow for the race.
Okay, okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett.
I can speak directly to that and tell you that they put out a flyer every year through Canada Post before they have their race. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we do have a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that Ironman Canada be granted permission to run the cycling portion of the 70.3 Triathlon through Sydney on Sunday, May 29th, 2022, subject to the following conditions. 1, that Ironman Canada provide the town with proof of $5 million liability insurance, naming the third party insured as the town of Sydney for this event. 2, that Ironman Canada submit for approval 4 weeks prior to the event a traffic management plan to the satisfaction of town staff and the RCMP. 3, that Ironman Canada send notices to affected residences and businesses advertising of the event and provide a contact number should there be any concerns or questions. 4, that Ironman Canada fund a fire department crew to be on call at the fire hall between 7 a.m. to 10:45 a.m. 5, that no costs are to be incurred by the town in relation to this event. And 6, the event follow the latest provincial health officers' guidelines and recommendations around mass gatherings and sport events.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. And the last staff report is the monthly building report. Sorry, no, I'm jumping one. 13E, the 2021 financial statements. Mr. Hissick wouldn't let me get away with that. We'll turn to Mr. Hissick for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The town's financial statements are in front of council for acceptance. They've been approved. They've been prepared according to generally accepted accounting principles for local government, and they're intended mostly for an external audience. As important as they are, the statements are prepared out of necessity more than a desire to provide useful local information, because it's difficult for the average reader to get anything meaningful from these highly consolidated set of numbers. So the ones we prefer to focus on are the year-end variance report, which is coming forward on May 9th for council's information. And that's the one that's more of an accountability measure for operations from last year. But since we provide detailed reports at the 6 and 9 month marks, there should not be too many surprises at year end, and that's what you will certainly see at the next meeting. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to address them.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions of the reports. Seeing none, we do have a recommendation.
I'll move the council accept the town's financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2021.
Second.
Seconded. Any discussion? Just want to thank staff for the preparation of these documents, and also for the preparations that took place for the audit that was held that led to the preparation of these statements. Thank you. All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. And I will turn to 13F, the monthly building report.
Move for receipt.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. We have no correspondence. We do have correspondence for information. I neglected during agenda review to indicate to council, and I'll do so now, that I would like to raise from correspondence for information item 5, which is the email from Jay Claxton expressing concerns regarding the climate and housing crisis dated April 9th, 2022, and the staff reply dated April 11th. And so I'll move that, I'll just raise that as correspondence, and I'll move receipt of it if there's a seconder. I'll speak to.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. This is a letter from Ms. Jennifer Claxton from the Saanich First Nation. It's several pages. It has the heading of Traditional Teachings for Sustainable Living. I found the document informative. At the end of the document, some 12 references were provided, reference and sources, and I would like to after this motion motion of receipt, I would like to move that this document be forwarded to strategic planning for the next council. So I'll leave it for discussion on receipt, and then have that motion arising. All in favor? Motion carries, and I'll move that this correspondence be referred to strategic planning for in the fall of this year.
Second.
Any discussion, Councillor O'Keefe?
No, I'm fine with that. The only thing, and I'm glad you raised this, because it's something that I looked at carefully as well. And the only thing that I would be hoping is that we would respond to Ms. Claxton to say that we've read this. I know that staff have sent something to say, please be assured that council will read this. But I think it would be nice to forward a response back to her acknowledging that council has reviewed this, and we will consider it more carefully during strategic planning, you know, with our plans with reconciliation and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. So I'll now turn to the remaining items of correspondence for information.
Move receipt?
Second.
All in favor? None opposed. That motion carries. We have no notices of motion or to go on camera. We'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So move?
Second.
All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you, council. Thank you, staff. Good evening.